I want to explore the relationship that Netflix's Atypical has with the representation or wider representation of autism. My aims are to investigate whether Atypical perpetuates a stereotype of what autism looks like. Atypical centres around Sam, a typical teenage boy with autism. The core of the narrative is about Sam's understanding and navigation of everyday life and the challenges he faces doing that. The issues raised mainly focus on Sam's personal relationships and how his autism affects the way that he's treated, predominantly by his family and his peers. Due to the serialised/episodic structure of the show, the problems that do come up are usually solved with relative ease and at the end of each episode. Whether it's resolving conflicts with his parents or his friends, or even finding a girlfriend, the issues we're presented with as an audience tend to be relatively straightforward. Whilst these may be issues that autistic people are facing or may well be facing, the show seldom deals with intersectionality, and we're presented with one image of autism, or one predominant image of it, especially in the first season. For example, Sam is autistic, yes, but he's still presented as a cis, white, heterosexual male. This in itself perpetuates a limited idea of autism that we already see on screen. We've seen so many examples of this hyper-intelligent, cis, white, male figure presented to us as a paradigm for autism. This figure is usually in search of a relationship or social understanding, or intelligent to the point of being a genius. Whether that's intentional or not, those themes consistently reoccur within TV. Sam's depiction or limited depiction of autism not only continues this trend, it stereotypes certain traits or symptoms of autism. By writing him with the purpose of being autistic, his character is constricted within a paradigm of offbeat jokes and trouble understanding sarcasm. Though these symptoms or traits of autism are true in some cases, it isn't necessarily the experience of autism everyone has. Like many of these shows, Atypical does very little to address socioeconomic or political factors surrounding autism. This, again, might be due to the nature of the show's structure, being a serialised one, not allowing enough time to delve into bigger subjects. For example, we don't really experience a sense of outsider conflict, and I'm not talking about peers or bullying or anything like that, I mean outsider systemic conflict, until season 2, episode 6. In this episode, we see Sam have a run-in with a very aggressive police officer who assumes that Sam's panic attack, which is a result of his autism, is actually a result of drug use and that he's a danger. The sequence is rightly jarring, and it really demonstrates the systemic problems that autistic people face in their everyday lives. A devastating real-life example of this was the case of Elijah McClain. He was a young black man who had autism, was out for a walk and got attacked by police because they assumed that his autistic traits were him acting out in a dangerous way, and as a result he lost his life. This was because police are inadequately trained with those kinds of things, because autism isn't dealt with or normalised enough societally. One of the most limiting aspects of the show is that it really struggles to deal with intersectionality in a full grounded way. If Sam had been cast as a person of colour, that police sequence would have gone down very differently. That's not to say there aren't any autistic characters of colour on the show. The only trouble is they're either background characters or get very little screen time, and they're not introduced to us as an audience until much later on in the seasons. More importantly though, those supporting characters don't fit that dominant paradigm. They're not presented as extremely intelligent or white, or just male. Abby is an autistically coded character that Sam meets at university. She's passionate about her art, she's got good social skills, and she's got a seemingly good understanding of nuance. But it's also obvious that she's not neurotypical. Jasper, who is part of Sam's autistic support group, wants to be a dentist. He doesn't necessarily have huge aspirations, but he's invested in his goal. And Amber, who is also part of Sam's support group, her special interest is ambulances and paramedics. These characters are all relatable because they're really grounded. And though they might be facing a challenge like autism, they're still aspirational individuals, but not to an exaggerated degree. Going on from that, if these supporting characters, who are all people of colour, had been foregrounded more, then different intersectionalities would have had to be addressed on the show. While I understand that keeping themes simple not only fits the serial structure that we see, it could be supposed that it also appeals to wider audiences, or predominantly whiter audiences. This is something that Richard Dyer addresses often in his essays on whiteness. Since being white has been presented to us as the default on screen, it becomes almost invisible. You don't notice necessarily how problematic it is that there is this lack of representation, and that invisibility reduces conversations surrounding intersectionality. Atypical as a whole is definitely flawed in its lack of representation, especially considering most of the characters of colour end up being confidants for the white characters, or Sam and his family specifically. Naturally, as the seasons passed and I had to watch them for this project, as the characters grew, I did find myself developing a sort of affection for them, and not necessarily Sam or his family, but the people surrounding him. Though I do think Rabia Rashid's representation of autism was limited in the foreground, it was definitely more varied and more grounded. The supporting and surrounding characters and the world that Sam lived in. I think that her influence as a Pakistani woman definitely had an impact on the way she built those characters. Additionally, autistically coded characters, as opposed to characters who are written with the purpose of being autistic, are further rooted in that reality. Because these characters are more down to earth and more varied and diverse, they might feel more relatable to a neurodivergent audience. There are so many online forums documenting characters that fandoms and autistic communities find canonically neurodivergent, or even see traits of neurodivergence in. So a more progressive solution could be to normalise diverse autistic traits, not only by writing autistically coded characters, but by exhibiting them on a range of different people. If characters are autistically coded as opposed to being written with the purpose of being autistic, they are less limited to stereotypes. This way writers can portray characters that are just as diverse and varied as the spectrum that they're on. Thank you.